Here we go.
Yeah, this is another episode of Absolute Zero. I'm Bertrand Leroy.
I'm Rachel Appel, and this
And
week it's
this week,
Fallacy Week.
ho 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 ho.
We could do this every week, though.
Yeah. hmm what do you want to start with?
Yeah. So, well, how
Just
about we'll start with basically the definition of a fallacy and what it is. So, a fallacy is an error in your thinking or an error in your reasoning. It undermines the logic of your argument. Your argument may be illegitimate, or your point may be irrelevant and just kind of off topic. Um,
so it doesn't mean that you're wrong, right?
it
It means
can,
that your reasoning is wrong.
right. It generally just means your reasoning is wrong, but sometimes that actually could mean you're wrong, but maybe not. Because you could still be right, but get the reasoning wrong about something.
Yeah, you can
Like
be
I
right
could,
for bad reasons.
right, I could say 2 plus 2 is 4, but I thought something completely different, right? So,
Okay, what's the difference between a fallacy and a bias?
so good one. So bias, which kind of ties in with fallacies, right? So where a fallacy is you're actually, coming up with, you're trying to come up with some logic, and that fails. What a bias is instead is when you tend to have certain modes of thinking, or certain biases or leanings toward a particular viewpoint. And sometimes we don't catch that we have those leanings and we apply them in our logic or in daily life. And that kind of ends up being a bias. The easiest one is sports teams, right? Your sports team versus the other sports team, whenever the referee makes a call and a judgment against your sports team, it was a bad call, right? You might be biased against your sports team or against their sports team.
Yeah, and I want to
So
say go sports.
go sports, sports ball, sports
Yeah.
puck, whatever it is. Yeah. Sports ball, sports pucks, sports shoes, all that stuff.
Sorry.
So, but that's an easy one with just an easy one with bias, right? Sports, it just shows up everywhere. Monday morning after every football game, you see that. As somebody who does not watch sports, if somebody shows me a play, I'm somebody who would be lacking bias in that. I don't care about either team. I don't watch it. You might as well put a 3-year-old there. They look at it and say, "Oh, the guy caught the ball before the line. It's in." I don't
Yeah, but
have anything to gain by saying
you may
actually.
have other unconscious biases.
I may have other biases, though, right? Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the thing about them. It's that you don't know you have them.
You don't know you have them. I mean, maybe that one guy on the one team was better looking than the other team, and I didn't realize that swayed me. I mean, that happens all the time with people. Political candidates, people pick them because more handsome people, taller people end up being president. So those are things that bias us, and we don't even know. So there could be plenty of things that are biasing us.
So how can you fight those biases?
Yeah, that's the uphill battle. So if we're going after bias, I think the biggest thing is to know that you have it. And I know a lot of people don't want to admit that they have it. You know why? Because they have a bias with
Yeah.
themselves, right? They think that they don't have a bias. So that's the first thing you got to get over. If you are human, you have bias, right? Every single one of us on earth has this bias. Animals have it too, right?
So how can we reach any conclusions about anything?
Yeah, that's the thing. Well, we still reach conclusions about all sorts of things, but I think the important thing is know that you have bias, and then when you're, like if you're talking about sports, realize that you might and start to look for where you think these might be. If you know that you're pro X, you might be biased to lean in that direction, or if you're against Y, right, you might be biased against it. So you kind of know where you stand on issues and your beliefs. Those are those things that create biases, right? Because you grew up with those things. You're kind of pickled in that culture and society that help you build those beliefs to begin with. So that's where a lot of the bias comes from.
And we do have a set of methods that are designed to to counter bias, right? That's science.
Yep, there's a word for that. It's called science.
Yeah, it's basically what science is. It's how do we discover facts, and how do we build knowledge that does not have those biases as much as possible.
Right. And that's a key thing that you said there. I don't think there will ever be, no bias whatsoever when it comes down to it, unless it is something trivial like sports. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that's trivial. To some people, it is not trivial at all. But, but yeah, I don't think we'll ever eliminate it. We just want to try to get it as close to eliminated as possible when you're doing any kind of science or argumentation or whatever.
And is it why we're saying that science is always provisional? Is it because we know that there will always be remaining biases, or is it just that there are limits to our knowledge, or is it both?
I think kind of both. We know that science keeps building on former science, right? Uproots some of it and extends other parts of it. So we root out some of those biases. But yeah, any scientist should know that there is bias and do what they can to prevent it as much as possible.
How about looking at specific biases and finding some funny examples of those?
Yeah, all right. So I'll start with an easy one. Something called attribution bias. This is like one of my favorites because it's like low-hanging fruit. So if you're looking to expand your skills in how to spot biases, this is an easy one. If you're walking down the road and it's your street that you live on, and you trip over a little root from a tree that's sticking out, and you trip over that, and you go, "Oh, damn, that wasn't there yesterday. That tree must have grown a little," right? Obviously, it wasn't me, right? The tree tripped me. But somebody else trips over that same root, and you're going to look at them and go, "You idiot." Right? So it's what's fundamental attribution. So I would attribute their failing to them being a failure. But my failing is certainly not me. It's the tree, it's the sidewalk, it's something else. But when it's them, it's because of them. But when it's because of an external. So you're attributing things incorrectly.
Yeah, I can think of another example, which is successful people attributing all of their success to their personal competence and how great they are, and never to any kind of luck.
Right.
And on the other hand, people who are less successful think they are unlucky.
Yep.
And don't recognize any responsibility in
right.
in that situation.
Both groups will have some luck. Both groups will have some bad luck as well. Both groups may be hardworking people, and both groups may not be. So there's, it's going to be across the board. But yep, that's another prime example. When you look at other people, anytime you look at another person and you think of saying that they did something or something happened and it's because of them, stop and think, is it really because of them? Or is it because of maybe also circumstances? And that doesn't mean that it's not them at all, 0%, but they may have some contribution to whatever situation it is, their success or failure. But to know that there's other factors at play as well.
So how does science actually eliminate bias? Can we maybe talk about a specific example of what medicine does, for example, to eliminate bias in, let's say, figuring out if a specific treatment is working or not?
That's kind of interesting. I don't know if I know exactly how the medical field does it, but I do know, like,
they usually do double-blind experiments, right?
Oh yeah, I was thinking you were meaning in clinical practice of the doctor when you said that. Oh no, that would totally
well, yes, that
double-blind
as well. That's also an interesting one. But to find out if a treatment works in general, the preferred method is double-blind.
Yeah.
What that means is that you have both the treatment being tested and a placebo, which is something that we know is going to be neutral. And you have a subset of the patients who receive the placebo and a subset that receives the experimental treatment. And neither where it's double blind is that neither the patient nor the doctors or the nurses and so on know whether a specific patient is receiving the placebo or the treatment. And that eliminates bias from the patient and from the doctors, which are both important. And if any of those are missing, then it's not true double blind, and you know that there is bias that is being introduced in the results, and they become unreliable.
Yep.
And I don't think there is another reliable way of doing this. I don't know of one.
Not a whole lot. If you look at some of the other ways that we do science, like surveys, tend to have a lot of bias in them.
Yeah.
Even though you can
yeah,
some rigor
and just to finish on the medical topic, it is an issue when treatments actually involve a dimension of human relationship,
right,
which a lot of treatments do. How do you treat psychoanalysis, for example, in a double-blind fashion?
Right. Yeah, that one's, yeah, that one's kind of difficult. So many variables.
Mm. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that we shouldn't say the scientific method.
Should just
to
be
describe
scientific method.
Yeah, exactly. So
the
double-blind, the double-blind experiment process is one of those processes, one of those scientific processes, but it's not the only one. The experimental process is another one, but it also has many variations. So what I'm trying to say is that the scientific methods are not fixed, and they actually evolve, they change over time, they are being improved on, and there is more than one way to apply it.
Yeah. Yep. So it's a lot easier if you're doing that kind of work to get rid of bias than it is just as a random human being walking about your daily life. Right?
What do you mean?
Because who walks around all day thinking about the fact that they may have bias or are applying it in their daily lives? People don't, unless they're actually in the middle of practicing science right then and there.
Mm-hmm. Do you know that quote by Richard Feynman, who was a Nobel Prize winner, famous physicist, discovered quantum electrodynamics and Feynman diagrams and stuff like that?
Well,
he was saying, well, yeah, there are many quotes from Feynman, but the one that particularly applies to today's topic is the first rule is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool.
And all right, so he says this, we say this, but then what do most people do the minute you say you're the most easiest person to fool, right? And then people immediately in their head think, no, I'm not. Everyone else is. If you do that, it's bias.
You're fooling yourself by saying that.
You're fooling yourself when you say that. You just did exactly what you said you don't do. So we all fool ourselves. Are you human? Yes, you fool yourself. I fool myself. You fool yourself. All right. I'm just willing to admit it, that I sometimes fool myself, and I try not to. And that's all I can do. That's the best you could do, is admit that this happens. Why? Because you're human. It's not bad. People think it's bad. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't make you a bad human. It makes you a human. But people think you're attributing some terrible thing to them when you say, well, you have some bias. No, it's called being a human. You have some. Just roll with that and just try to reduce it later.
So that's interesting. Actually, why do we have bias?
So I'm going to blame evolution for this one, right? Because if you think about it, what does bias do for us? It allows us to take cognitive shortcuts in many cases, right? And if you look at us evolving where we were once the prey, or dealing with other alpha animals out there, that it could easily come into, altercations. And, you're talking about either you're the predator or prey in that situation, right? You might not always be at the top of the chain. We weren't. You hear rustling in the leaves. Do you let your bias take over and run the hell away and not get eaten? Or do you stop and logically think about this as cave person and then get eaten by the bear? Well, I think we know how we got here is by not being eaten by the bear. And that bias helped us with that. So it is actually a good tool for us in many cases and has been, I think, in an evolutionary sense. And Michael Shermer actually talked about this at length in some of his books on skepticism and how to do science. As a matter of fact, he has an Audible, one of the great courses on thinking like a skeptic, and he talks at length about how bias is, what he believes is a byproduct of evolution, and I kind of go with that theory as well. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the downside to having the bias in that particular situation is almost zero. You run away for nothing, but
right. But that's
no bad consequences.
And as a matter of fact, so that would be called a false positive, right? One of a class 1 error in thinking, a false positive. But that's okay because you didn't die. If you have a false negative, you're probably dead because you didn't know it was the bear or the lion. So it helped us evolutionarily to make those kind of mistakes.
So that would explain all the biases where you see a pattern, a pattern detection in general, right?
Yeah. Oh, we are pattern detecting machines. Yeah.
Does it explain all biases?
Oh, I don't know that it explains all of them, but because you figure, so now that we're not evolving in that same way anymore, well, new biases may creep up for other reasons. Old ones might kind of be a little bit more diminished. It just depends on where you live and what's happening at the time, I guess. But I wouldn't say that evolution can account for all of them.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier about taking shortcuts is very interesting.
Because you can use bias to take shortcuts and generally be okay. And if you have a couple of false positives, well, okay. You didn't die, you can always go back and think about that and fix your logic later or whatever, right? In a modern society anyway.
Yeah, and we do have to take shortcuts, right? If we were extreme skeptics and verifying absolutely everything over and over again, we would stop functioning.
Yeah, but you would literally, yes, not be able to live your day every minute, like thinking like that. And
yeah, I remember reading a few cartoons like that where a guy, wakes up in the morning and, oh, no, actually there is a thing in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, by the way.
Yes.
Where, okay, so you remember how they thought Beaverbrook is the president of the galaxy, but he's not here to exercise power. He's here to distract people from power.
Yeah.
A little like a certain presidential candidate. And the real ruler of the galaxy is actually a guy on a beach living in a shack who is an extreme skeptic. So he has a cat, and he spends his days wondering if that cat is the same one that he saw 5 minutes ago. He certainly believes that it is, but can he really be sure about that? And his whole thought process is completely diverted by useless considerations like that.
Yep.
Of course, he's right about everything, but he's also
not
unable to function properly.
Right.
And this is actually the guy ruling everything and making all the decisions, but he's making them in such a detached way,
Right. So which brings up a good point. A lot of people think that thinking logically is simply removing emotions from the equation, and it's not. It's understanding the emotions that are underpinning why you have these feelings and what drives you to that bias and those points of view in the first place. Once you get past that, then you can really start to analyze your thoughts a little better, I think.
Yeah. Do you want to look at some funny fallacies now that we've talked about bias a lot.
Fallacies.
Sorry.
Errors in reasoning.
Do you know the Texas sharpshooter? Do you remember that one?
Yeah, so you're gonna, if you're a sharpshooter, then you're just gonna nitpick on one little thing that you're basically sharpshooting at.
No, so the Texas sharpshooter fallacy is, let's say you're a shooter, and instead of shooting at a target, you just shoot at random, and then you draw the target around the bullet hole.
Oh, okay, all right. I was thinking of a different thing. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's right. That is actually the one for the sharpshooter.
Yeah. Which one were you thinking about?
I tend to think of that one as the moving the goalposts, which it's close.
No, not exactly. So moving the goalpost would be that you argue for something and then you're proven wrong on that. And so instead of recognizing you're wrong, you just change the goal.
Yeah.
So for example, an anti-vaccination person might say, well, the mercury in the vaccines is a bad thing, and that makes vaccination dangerous. And then you say, well, okay, well, let's remove the mercury. And then that person will say, okay, well,
in that.
What?
Okay, but some vaccines are made with eggs and there's salmonella in that, and you can get E. coli and stuff.
Exactly. So now you're moving the goalpost and you're saying, okay, well, that's not the real reason why vaccines are bad. This is the new reason. And then you address that one, and it goes on and on and on, and there is always something.
Yeah, always something.
Okay.
It's like an unlimited end of fallacies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, well, you're still kind of making a distraction from the argument, right? You keep taking it off. And the sharpshooters where you're making your point and then it didn't pan out, so you're the drawing the circle around rather than just nitpicking on one little thing. Like some people will do that. And
yeah, so that
like for instance, if you speak wrong or use the wrong word for something, and they'll pick it out and they'll say something like, oh, all right, so how's this one? Like global warming and climate change, and they'll say, well, global warming. Well, how come they decided to change the term from global warming to climate change? Well, because the first term was not great marketing. Has nothing to do with any of the science or theories behind it. The term is just what we call it. It really doesn't have much to do with it. But they zero in on that and just keep sticking to that. No matter what you say, that, which means nothing. It's completely meaningless. That
it's a distraction.
Is what destroys all of your arguments. Well, it doesn't, because not only is what they say is meaningless, but they're not actually addressing any of your arguments.
Yeah, it's as we've seen over the past couple of weeks, it's common that conspiracy theorists hatch onto one little detail that is actually insignificant, and just won't let go of that one, and yeah.
Which would be fine if we're an actual significant problem, but these are usually like really minutia, and it's
counter examples are fine, but usually they are more like attributing way too much meaning to something that is actually insignificant and random.
Yep.
And failing to see the big picture, and instead focusing very, very narrowly on one very simple.
Right?
Yeah.
Here's another good one I see, especially with our, being that we're in a political climate right now. I think I've been even guilty of this myself. Argument to moderation, because I'm not an extremist. Right? I tend to like the middle ground on things. That doesn't mean the middle ground is right all the time now. But it does happen, just assuming that because, A has this option on one side, B has this option on or opinion on the other, and you're like, nope, it's got to be something in the middle. Well, sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not.
Okay, so here is an example. Let's say I believe there is no God, and you believe there is a God. So is the truth that there is 0.5 gods? That doesn't work.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Like, is there some religion which might actually? No, I
A
don't actually.
demigod,
Or this,
maybe?
or like you want to build a subway station or a subway line, right? So half the town is opposed, half the town is for. Do you build half the line? I mean, you can, but it'll make it essentially useless, right? So the middle's not always a good one, right? In that case,
Yeah.
right,
And
the subway should be in or not. The God should be there or not. It's not half a God, half a subway.
you can actually see a more, let's say, subtle application of that in the way that Republican politics have evolved over the past, I don't know, 30 years, where the more extreme part of the Republican Party has been getting more and more extreme, and if you have a moderate party on one end and very extreme on another end, and if you take the middle ground from those, you'll get into a position that is actually not neutral at all.
Right.
So when you're preaching for moderation and middle ground, you need to do it between positions that are not extreme.
Yeah. Yep.
So it doesn't actually help a lot.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't. It's just basically saying I can't make up my mind. Let's split it down the middle. That's kind of what that is, right?
Can't we say I don't know?
There's
instead.
that. How about the other one? The post hoc ergo propter hoc is another popular one. We see this a lot. The after this, therefore because of this, right? Like a cause and effect, right? Because A happened, that means before B, that means that B happened. Not necessarily.
And that's related to causation.
Yep. And there's a lot of distinctions and where people drop these faulty correlations of things and causation of things.
Well, one day we should talk about causation in general, and and does causation only make sense if there is time? So does causation require succession of events? I will add that to our long list of topics.
Long list of things to go on about. So something like, for that particular fallacy, smoking causes cancer. So if I quit smoking, I'll never get cancer. Well, no, just because you quit smoking doesn't mean that because you did that previously means that you won't get cancer.
Well, like, it does reduce the probability.
It reduces the probability, but it doesn't mean flat out that you won't.
So there might be correlation here, but and causation.
Maybe not. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and there's what, like hundreds and hundreds more fallacies and biases and all that kind of stuff out there.
Yeah, and I guess maybe the general advice could be recognize your biases, recognize your own fallacies before you start recognizing them in others, maybe.
Well, Michael Shermer points out that he goes, it is really easy to see bias and fallacy in others, and it's not so much in yourself. And that is true. It is much harder to see it.
Which is bias, again.
Which is bias again. What I like to do to try to mitigate some of that is, again, like knowing that you're biased. I like to approach things like, if I make a statement, how will somebody else prove me wrong? Can I get there before they do so that I don't look like an ass later, right? Who made a fallacy. Even though you're not an ass for making a fallacy. You're human, right? We just established that. Or a bias. But what I want to do is get there to correct myself before somebody else could point it out. So I try to make it a little race, so if I'm arguing like for whatever, for vaccines or whatever, I'm going to go in there and look at this and say, well, okay, if I say X about vaccines, do I have facts to back it up? Can I smash apart my reasoning as much as possible? And of course, bias is going to get in the way at every turn when I try to do this. So every time I try to go and investigate more, I have to keep it in my mind, the diligence of, a bias can.
So you're trying to prove yourself wrong.
I try to prove myself wrong. And another thing I do is I've taken the attitude of wanting to prove myself wrong, wanting to change my beliefs. I've been trying to embrace like an atmosphere of I want to change my beliefs. And I've already done this. I've changed my beliefs based off of facts many times. But that's the thing. There's always, what I see is facts there. So I'm willing to do that more times, but that's the thing. You need that attitude of being willing to do so, because once you have a belief, it really gets lodged in there and you become very defensive about it, right? So what I'm trying to do is psychologically make myself so that I'm more amenable to being able to uproot my own position about stuff. So I actually take measures to try to do that. It doesn't always work, but it's better than not doing it, I think.
So, by the way, that's what scientists do. When a scientist publishes a new result, the rest of the themselves and the rest of the scientific community actually tries actively to prove it wrong.
Yep. Yeah, it's
and
like
if it does resist all the attempts to prove it wrong, then it has a chance of being right.
Yeah, I do like a little mini Raichi review, myself. So I try to do that as much as possible. So, or things like another bias that's really, really popular is confirmation bias. So you will already think in a certain direction, and you're apt to just look for things that fit that preconceived notion. So what I do is I specifically make sure that first of all, I don't do TV media because it's too easy to just have stuff spoon-fed. So I will search out newspapers and written materials that are across the spectrum of beliefs. So if I read, say, something liberal, then I'll find something conservative on that same topic that has a counterpoint to read. So I won't just be reading something where, if I read anything and I go, yes, I agree, I try to stop myself and find something that disagrees. And then I try to read that as well.
Interestingly,
it takes a lot of time to do this.
Interestingly, Facebook actually...
Facebook helps you because people will put in those articles for you.
No, but they have a feature where underneath an article, you get 2 or 3 other articles, and they're trying to give you counterpoints, actually.
Yep.
Which I think it's a really neat feature from Facebook.
I thought that was cool, too, yeah. But that's what I think other people should do. I mean, it does take some time, so it's things that are more important. If it's not something that's more important to me, and then I usually don't even bother getting into discussions about it at that point. But it's important to me, then I'm definitely going to try to look at it from other viewpoints as well, right? Because those other people aren't bad people. They're not necessarily wrong people. I can be wrong too. So why don't I give them that benefit of doubt and really try to understand where they're coming from.
I was going to say, Facebook also has the opposite feature of that, which is that if you don't like a post, you have this little menu on the top right where you can say, I don't want to read articles like that anymore.
Mm-hmm. I will do that for Candy Crush.
That's fine. That's fine. But if you're saying, I never want to hear that kind of point of view again.
Yeah. I will purposely not do that for that reason.
I have to admit I do it. There are some...
I can't say I've never done it, but I really try not to do it.
I do it for really offensive stuff.
I was just going to say, if it's really offensive, then I'll just do I just don't want to see certain things. I don't need something with a bunch of swear words. And for somebody who swears so much. But you know what I mean? Just all kind of...
Really?
Stuff. Yeah. I know. All right when I do it. Not all right when other people do it. See what I did there?
Yep.
It's not swearing when I do it because I'm a good person, but it's swearing when they do it because they're bad people. See, it's that fundamental attribution bias.
So there are lots of good resources on the internet to learn about logical fallacies and biases.
Actually, just go to yourlogicalfallacyis.com and you know what? Pick out one a week. It's not like these are gigantic subjects, right? Just go and look for common fallacies. Pick out one and just read up about it and think about a scenario or two where you've seen this come up in real life, discussions with your friends or whatever.
A good question to ask yourself is, when is the last time I made that one?
I made that one myself, right? When's the last time? Like when's the last time you made an ad hominem, right? Like when did I last call somebody a name? It's been a long time because I specifically try not to do that because that kind of is being an ass, right?
Yeah.
Name calling kind of is being an ass. Plus, it doesn't help your point. It's not logical. So things like that, you can easily say, when did I do that last? And admit it to yourself. It's okay.
Cool. Excellent. Do we have a topic for next week?
Oh, yeah, I don't know yet.
Yeah, we talked about causation. How about we do this one?
Yeah, we could do the causation one. That'd be cool.
Okay. So next week, causation. Are we doing Thursday or Friday? Well, we'll see. But in any case.
Thursday. Yeah.
Are we done?
Yep, we're done.
Cool. So that's it for today's Absolute Zero. I'm Bertrand Leroy.
I'm Rachel Appel, and until next week.
Until next week.
Happy
Bye.